Welcome everyone to another UX Monday. My name is Tobias Wybierał. I'm a host tonight, and I'm so grateful to have here so many new faces. We try to organize UX Monday every first Monday of a month, except from summer holidays. So summer holidays are over. UX Monday season is alive, and the UX Monday itself, they are organized by UX Association. Wouldn't be here without the support of our friends and people who believe in our mission, and those are LMC, who's a long-time partner of Association UX and everything we are doing. So thanks for them. Also a new partner, Sinner Shader, and MSD. MSD is, one more time, a long-time partner of UX Mondays, and I'm so happy to have Summer Stickney here with us, who is from MSD, because I've been trying, trust me, for so long to get someone from MSD to present here, because they're doing so amazing stuff, but they just can't talk about it. So I was furious every time, and that's why I'm so happy that Summer is here. But what is the UX Association? For you who are not members of it, we have a mission of educating both UX community, meaning designers and product owners and CEOs, to be better in designing stuff, and also to educate the general public to know what the UX is, why it makes sense to invest in UX, and not just oh, we know what we want to build, so let's build it. No, there's a process behind it, and that's what we are trying to do: connect the community and educate both the community itself and the general public. And so far we have more than 200 members. We organize more than 300 events, and we are here for 25 years. So it's just wow, it's almost older than I am, but just almost. And if you are not a part of this community, please go to UX Association and try everything, find everything we are doing there, and please join UX CZ Slack community when this is the most live place on Czech internet when to be active in the community itself. So this is UX Association, and I guess you already noticed, but if you want to support this event and everything we are doing as a association, either be a member or consider a donation. So either with this QR payment link, it's not just QR, so your regular QR reader won't do the trick. You have to open your bank app, click on QR payment, and then scan it. I will stop myself here and now, give a word to Summer. Summer, please be my guest and take this place.
So an introduction to me first. My name is Summer Stickney. I am a senior UX designer here at MSD, the wonderful MSD. My interests are varied, but I read The New Yorker every week religiously. It takes all of my free time. This particular issue is one of my favorites. I actually have a print of this in my flat. It's this picture. It's called Missed Connections, and the illustrator went to Berkeley, actually, where I went to university also. His name is Adrian Tomine, and I just love that they probably will never see each other again. Anyway, I love that cover very much. In my free time, I like to hike and run on trails. I also really enjoy old video games, particularly Super Mario Brothers, and also Ms. Pac-Man. Sometimes Galaga, but sometimes not. And then when I'm not doing those things, I like to try to maintain my garden, which is a never-ending quest filled with frustration and doom. So my background, I was an early adopter of Flash, which is a technology that does not exist anymore, but I was really good at it. I also was really good at hand coding HTML5 and CSS, again, skills that I no longer use when I switched more to the UX realm, but you know. I also am a member of the Nested Tables Anonymous Club, which is a big group of people who really overuse nested tables. And for design inspiration, one of my chief sources is Edward Tufte. He's a professor at Yale. And he's a big champion of simplicity and of design and information graphics serving a real purpose, and love him deeply. He's got several books out that everybody should read because they're wonderful. So our topic today is racism and sexism in medical device and service design. This topic got me really interested because historically medicine has been kind of viewed through the lens of the man. Women and people of color were kind of an afterthought. They were not considered at all and considered very little if they were. But why should men be the default? Humanity is diverse, yet we consider just this narrow group of people to be the majority. So recently, I think we've been pretending to be gender and race blind, but this has had drastic side effects for women and people of color because they're outside of this predetermined norm. So this topic, I think, has led me to look at medical services and devices and see how people making these products have unintentionally, usually, discriminated against women and minorities, how they've engaged in implicit and explicit racism, how there's this thoughtlessness, this one-size-fits-all approach that I'll get into some detail, how explicit biases and overt racism and sexism, even homophobia, have operated inside conscious minds, and how implicit bias has operated in subconscious minds of people creating these products. So I think implicit bias also leads to underestimating the level of pain that women and people of color experience. So that's how I started getting interested more and more in this topic. Okay, so I'd like to start with a riddle. If you've already done this riddle, please don't ruin it for the rest of the room. But a father and a son are in a horrible car accident that kills the father. The son is rushed to the hospital. Just as he's about to go under the knife, the surgeon says, "I can't operate. This boy is my son." So anybody want to wager a guess? Can they explain this riddle? Anybody? Wow, nobody knows this? You know it.
I don't know it.
But nobody's ever heard this before? Oh, interesting. Oh, cool. I thought I was going to be rehashing old stuff. It's not a new riddle. So give me your answer.
Well, that's definitely not going to be correct. But immediate thought is that obviously the father who died in the car crash wasn't the biological father. But obviously the surgeon was like, I don't know, a lover of his father.
Okay. Anybody else got a guess? Go ahead. Please, no, go.
The surgeon is not.
Okay. Bravo. Was that also your guess? Beautiful. Well, I would say in Europe that's true. More here, like the proportion of female surgeons and doctors of the more demanding persuasions is higher here. So it's not, but in other places it's not so much. But we'll get into that in a minute. Nice. So this, like I said, this isn't new. This is I think 30 years old probably. But in 2014, researchers at Boston University ran this riddle by two groups. One was psychology students, 197 psychology students at Boston University. And then they ran it by a bunch of children, age 7 to 17. In both groups, only a small minority, 15% of the little kids and 14% of the psychology students came up with the mother answer, which I think is kind of fascinating. Like the children are more open-minded than the older kids or the psychology students. Oh, that's wonderful. I'm so happy I really thought that might be old news. Okay. Ooh. So, sorry. So today we will talk about neutrality, in quotes, for a reason. I'm going to look at this side where there is no sun. Medical devices, medical services, some user experience stuff, like we're not going to get into interfaces, but you'll see. Artificial intelligence and some solutions that have been proposed to make sure that we're not racist and sexist in our medical device and service design. So first up, let's talk about neutrality. At what percentage, this is an open question and I would like some answers, what percentage do you consider somebody or a group a minority? Like, is it less than 50? Is it, throw out a number, any number. I'm curious. 10%. 10% is a minority? Anybody else have? I mean, there's no right answer, I'm just curious. 20? Okay. So I ask this question because oftentimes, especially in medicine and in general in life, women make up 50% of the world, but we're often treated like we're a minority. We're half, at least half. So why is it that we treat 50% of the world like they're a smaller group? I think this, in modern times, comes out to this idea of gender neutrality. It means one size fits all. And when they say one size fits all, they usually mean one size fits a 70-kilo white man, which is funny because not many men are 70 kilos anymore, and white men are not a majority of the population. But that's kind of the neutral place we start from. So an example of this, not in medicine, but in general life, office temperatures. So in the 1960s, they came up with this formula, and they said, okay, we need to figure out what the optimum office temperature is. So they based their formula on a 40-year-old man that was 70 kilos. And they also wore a lot of clothes back then, right? So now the average office temperature is 5 degrees too cold for women because we don't have metabolisms that move as fast as men. So we're constantly shivering and trying to wear blankets while men are perfectly comfortable. We need to have some kind of way to meet in the middle in these situations. Another example that's medical is anatomy textbooks. So oftentimes when you go into a medical textbook section, and every image, whether it's skeletal or muscular, will just be a man. For no reason, like they're not women. And if, for instance, skeletal, like we have a different pelvis, and that will be just like an inset, but the default will be male. Why? Doesn't make sense. So there's this large data gap when it comes to women and people of color being represented in these situations. Another data gap that's kind of a personal story for me, semi-personal. My best friend's a pediatrician, and her colleague came to her and said, I have this patient, it's a baby, and the baby's not thriving. Like, the growth chart is really bad, I'm really scared, will you please take a look? So my friend goes and meets the baby and the parents. The parents are from Peru. In Peru, the average height for a man is 165 centimeters. The average height for a woman is 152 centimeters. The growth charts in America and in Europe are based on white Europeans that are much larger. So the baby was fine. The baby was growing normally for the place the baby's parents were from, but we don't adjust these things. Like, similarly, for me personally, like my kids have giant heads. I don't know why, but like it's because these charts are based on this mean that doesn't really reflect the diversity of the population and the giant-headed people among us. So I would say also that all of these situations, it's not like there's some evil overlord in the back room saying, I want to exclude women and minorities. It's more that they're just not thinking properly and they're not including us in their plans. So next I'd like to show you this quote. This is from Caroline Criado Perez from her book Invisible Women, which is amazing and everybody should read it. Medical establishment people, they don't deliberately set out to exclude women, they just don't think about them. And so part of why I'm beating my drum here today is to get us all to be thinking about inclusive design for across all spectrums, but especially in the medical industry. I think oftentimes, like I said, this doesn't come from a place of malice, but rather a place of ignorance or just not thinking. So not including women in data sets, not collecting disaggregated data based on women or minorities, in order to kind of appear neutral. Look, we're not showing anything here, so everything's great, but it's not, because drugs and devices affect women and people of color differently. So first, we will talk about medical devices. I think some of these you will know, other will be maybe a bit more shocking. So first up, infrared thermometers. Now, we all remember the fun times of COVID when these were everywhere. But the problem with them is, according to an Emory University study, the infrared thermometers are 26% less accurate on dark skin. So this is because there was not proper testing before the launch, and so they created this product that only works on white skin. Oops. So during COVID, this was a big problem because a lot of people were having their temperature appeared lower than normal, lower than it actually was, and so they weren't getting diagnosed quickly enough. Similarly, oximeters, they measure your blood oxygen level through this device that you put on your finger. They were first created in the 1970s, but not tested on dark skin, again. So they were overestimating oxygen levels in people with darker skin. They were 3 times more likely to miss low oxygen levels on black patients than white patients. There's a hypothesis going around right now that one of the reasons we had such a large number of black and brown people in America dying from COVID was that they were reading oxygen levels higher than they actually were, and they weren't being hospitalized or put on additional oxygen soon enough. But the problem is that we had some data about this. Evidence dating back to 1976 shows that scientists were aware that pulse oximeters were influenced by skin pigmentation. Even leading researchers said to say the method was not capable of making absolute measurements. So many experts agreed that this tool was a rather blunt tool, but even during COVID, this was kind of taken as this perfect, answer, and it's not. It definitely was overused and to many people's detriment. Okay, the next one is rather wild. So a spirometer is a device you blow into, and it helps measure lung capacity. Again, during COVID, these were pretty popular to see if you had diminished lung capacity or not. But it's not a problem of the design or the fit of this product, but rather the software that they use. It asks, one of the first questions that you have to input into the interface is what the race of the patient is. So after the clinician selects that, then the problem starts. It uses flawed 19th century research in the software to determine lung capacity. So the story gets really crazy because it begins with one of the founding fathers of America. I just quickly, does anybody here know who Thomas Jefferson is? And what do you know about him? Okay, who else? I won't pick on the people in the middle. He did own slaves, very good, very good. So Thomas Jefferson was, one of our leading intellectuals, also a big slave owner, and kind of disgusting about that, if I'm honest. So he hypothesized, because, this is what slave owners do, that that black people had a difference of structure in their pulmonary apparatus. So based on no science, obviously. But there was no way to test this until in 1840, a physician in London named John Hutchinson developed a new spirometer. And he was using it, he said, okay, let's use it to diagnose tuberculosis. We can use it to monitor fitness of police and army personnel, and for life insurance purposes. But then he was trying to figure out the differences in lung capacity between different people, and he couldn't just use height and weight. There were some other factors involved, and he couldn't figure out what they were. So he thought, okay, let's add occupation to one of the factors that's affecting lung capacity. Obviously, that wasn't true either, but it was 1840s London. He was doing his best. So then race came back into the discussion when a different slaveholder than Thomas Jefferson, Samuel Cartwright, got one of those spirometers, and he drew on Jefferson's hypothesis and said, okay, I'm pretty sure that the difference in lung capacity between my slaves and white people is due to their genetic inferiority. And he wanted to, like, you know, he said, this is the way. And this was taken kind of as scientific fact at the time, which is completely crazy. But what did he say? Oh, here's a great quote. The deficiency in the Negro was 20%, the deficiency. By the way, this is proven not true now completely. But this became accepted fact for many, many years. And it was never challenged by the medical establishment. Then after the Civil War, a man named Benjamin Althorp Gould led a study of recently freed slaves. He made no adjustment for height, age, weight, their living conditions, but he just said full blacks, the people that were completely black, had lower lung capacity. Again, founded on nothing. But featuring race with only marginal attention to the intersection of race and social class, we risk ignoring the complex and dynamic relationships between lung function and the environment. I think that's a wild ride. Just that device alone is crazy. I want to pause really quickly because I've been saying a lot. Does anybody have any questions, concerns, criticisms? Okay. Yes.
Okay, thank you. I think like a lot of these things came from historic medicine because the medicine we use even today came from Europe.
Yeah.
When they study people, they have people from execution or battles, which was mainly white men.
Yeah.
That's like the historical things why in all of these textbooks are white men,
Yep.
not women and stuff like that. And I think like, what's your point of view on this? Because like even modern textbooks, probably, I didn't study medicine, are based on the books like 50 years ago.
Yeah.
And it was based on the books 50 years before that and 50 years before that. And like the education maybe can or is the problem of this.
It's a big problem, and we have to be more inclusive in representation from the textbook level onward, or we're never going to get anywhere. Like, it's terrible still how, and I'll get into that in some slides coming up, but it's still the case that the default is just considered this white man, and there's no attempt at inclusivity or representing people that look different at all. But as designers, I think hopefully maybe one of us will get hired for a textbook and then we can influence it. But yeah, I mean, but if we spread the word and it's in our heads, then we can help make this happen in like small ways, in subtle ways. But it's possible. Okay, there's so much COVID fun in this. The masks, the filtering face piece masks. As you can see from our lovely model, hers does not fit at all. It's over her glasses, loose on her nose, loose on her chin. There were tests done after the rise of COVID that found that women and people of Asian descent had fit ratios of down to 40% of proper fit. So like only 40% of people, of women and Asian descent, had their mask fitting properly, which is insane, and probably made them all have COVID. Another example is fall detection devices. So these are, they're two different kinds. There can be ones that just automatically will call medical personnel if they detect a fall. There's other ones where an elderly person can tap. But mainly these are used by women. Women make up 59% of the elderly population in the US, and it's similar in Europe, and 75% of the population living alone. Women face different types of injuries from men, and 71% of fall injuries are women. So we know our demographic here. The rate of fracture in women is 2.2% higher than in men. And they did a meta-analysis of 53 different fall detector studies and found that only half of them described the sex of the participant, giving no sex disaggregated data. So essentially, we don't know who was these devices were being tested on. And this is important because most elderly women that object to these detectors do because they're bulky, they're hard to carry around, and they don't want to use them for those reasons. And some designers have thought, well, the great solution to this is let's have an app, and you can have it on your phone. But the problem with phones and elderly women is they often don't have pockets. So if you have this detection device in a handbag and your handbag falls, it doesn't record a fall. It just, because it's cushioned, you know. So, but this is this is another case where the users of this product were never consulted ahead of time. The product was made here, it's for you, use it. And yeah, there was old lady revolt and they're not doing so. So we need to rethink these things with the end user in mind from the beginning. This is a curious one. So scalp electrodes and electrocardiogram, or encephalogram, sorry, different device. So these don't work so well on people of African descent and the kind of hairstyles that they'll have. These things work best on thin, short hair to get, you know, really to the scalp. So African texture hair, they have a hard time getting the electrode in with there, it has to be also a lubricant in there. So between those two things, researchers really struggle to find appropriate or alternate methods to recruit and retain data collected from Black participants. Because of this, EEG testing excludes Black people for the most part, unless they're willing to shave their head for the study. And I don't know many people that just shave their head for a study. But there is one bright point. There is one device that's being tested right now. It's called a servo electrode. And it's basically like a hair clip that will hold the hair back and also place the electrode really close to the scalp. But we should be thinking about this from the moment we create a product, not having a product not work and then try to backfill with a solution. And finally, does anybody know about these? Okay, so these are pinky period gloves. They were, I would say this is a case of creating a problem where none existed. This product was created by two German men. Shocking that a man would create a product that stigmatizes menstruation. So these two men were on a TV show. I think in America, I think that they have one called Shark Tank, but it's basically where entrepreneurs present their ideas and get funding. So this one was called The Lion's Cave in Germany. And this product was so cool to the people at Lion's Cave that one of the judges automatically said, a male judge, by the way, said, I would like to invest 30,000 euros in your great product that stigmatizes menstruation and makes women feel dirty. So there was some backlash to this. And I mean, personally, I just want to point out that not only is it unnecessary, but it's plastic single use. Like, it's an ecological punch in the face, as well as a sexist punch in the face. And if you notice from the picture, it's huge. It doesn't even fit a woman's hand. So yeah, that was some guys thinking that. So The Guardian wrote this up. Twitter went crazy. Oh, I can explain it. So this product is meant for when a woman is menstruating because she doesn't want to soil herself with her menses. She uses this glove so that she doesn't have to touch her own body. Yeah, see, this is why you don't understand, because it's stupid. It's stupid. So everybody went crazy and said it's stupid, all over Twitter, all over. But the Guardian, the English newspaper, wrote one of the funniest things about the gloves. The article says, quote, if ever you feel you're not good enough, try channeling the confidence of a man who invents pointless feminine hygiene products and pitches them on TV. So there was a big backlash. They apologized. They pulled the product off the market. Yeah, but, and I think, washing your hands? It's pink. If you make it pink, it's for ladies. Even if it's made for giant ladies with bulbous fingers. Yeah, it doesn't make any sense, right? It's completely senseless. A sadder example, and crappier, in my opinion, talcum powder. Does anybody know, like, baby powder? Like, so that's, I don't know about in Europe, but in America and the UK, I know, it was marketed to make you feel fresh. So you would put it on your genitals. Yes, because we need to add powder to make us feel fresh. I don't know. So it was marketed for a long time as, you know, a way to keep you dry and fresh. But it turns out that it's really closely linked to ovarian cancer. If you use talcum powder at all in your genitals, you have a 33% higher risk of ovarian cancer. And people are dying because they were meant to feel somehow dirty and smelly about their own biology. And that went on for a long time. Like, I think they just stopped putting baby powder on the market in the States very recently. They also found out that often the talc contains asbestos. Insane. I'm going to pause again. Any questions? Comments? Does anybody want me to give you a link to go buy some pinky gloves? Okay, on to medical services. This is where it gets maybe even sadder. First of all, let's talk about the surgical environment. This is, you know, surgery is like a complicated ballet. Like, it requires grace, coordination, different moving parts working together, people communicating, and almost like anticipating needs before they happen. But in many surgeries, the standard is to send a standard surgery kit to the surgery theater that will just have uniforms, protective gear in size XL. Only XL. So you have these people working in this environment that are in these giant tents that cannot perform their jobs as they should be because their garments don't fit. And then the surgical tools are largely designed by and for white men with large hands. This is not good for several reasons, but mostly, if we think about 75% of people that work in healthcare are women. 50.5% of medical students in the USA are women. 68% of medical students in the UK are women. So essentially, we're providing them with equipment that's not meant for them, and they're the majority of the population using that equipment. Tools and personal protective gear should fit the bodies of the people in the room, not some ideal that doesn't match the current demographic of the users. And I mean, this puts, think about it, puts lives at risk. People are not getting the best care because this protective gear does not fit their operating staff. All right, heart attack symptoms in men and women. Now, there are some symptoms that happen in both men and women: lightheadedness, shortness of breath, chest pain, upper body pain, cold sweats, vomiting, nausea. But women have an extra set of symptoms that are not as well known, unfortunately, which include fatigue, insomnia, flu-like symptoms, heartburn, indigestion, and women's heart attacks can last for days. So there are many cases where a woman will go in with one of these symptoms, be sent home by the hospital, and have a heart attack within the next day or two. So they're just, it's a more drawn out process for women. So a 2018 study tracked 582,000 heart attack cases in Florida emergency rooms from 1991 to 2010. 13.3% of women and 12.6% of men treated by male doctors died from their heart attacks. Female doctors providing treatment, however, the gap narrowed. 12% of women died, and 11.8% of the men died. Heart attack, especially in younger women, is really underdiagnosed. They get sent home saying, oh, you probably have the flu or it's some lady problem. And it's dangerous because even young women can have heart attacks. And it's often overlooked because doctors are not educated. Again, like the textbook thing, those symptoms don't often show up. We're led to have this idea of heart attack as some overweight older man clutching his chest and falling over. And that's not the reality of heart attacks. It affects a lot of different people. All right, there's also a big disparity in health outcomes for women. Cultural norms affect how women rest and recover. 2016 Canadian study showed that women in Canada took almost none of the recommended recovery time, while all the male subjects of the study took all their recovery time. And there was a Finnish study that showed single women recover from heart attacks better than married women. I know, you're all shocked, right? It's so shocking. And then finally, this University of Michigan study showed that women's housework increased 7 hours per week, while men had no increase of household work when they got married. So the burden of housework and childcare often forces women to cut short their recovery time, to cut short their self-care time, and prioritize family and caregiving over their own well-being. Another problem we face, doctors tend not to believe women and people of color about pain. So women's physical pain is likely to be seen as emotional or psychosomatic. They're just having feelings. Studies from the 80s and 90s showed that when men reported pain, they were given painkillers. But when women were reporting pain, they were given sedatives or antidepressants. Cute. National Institute of Health study found that white medical students underestimated pain in black patients and had an implicit racist beliefs, i.e. black people have thicker skin, which is not true. But it exists even in very educated medical students. And in the same vein, black patients are under-prescribed medicine for pain, while white patients are overprescribed. And I think you can see this really well in the USA right now with the opioid epidemic, which is affecting mainly white Americans because they're just given the drugs, just take them all. And alarmingly, 35% of minority cancer patients receive the appropriate prescriptions for their pain. So imagine that, 75% of minority cancer patients are not getting the drugs they need for pain. It's astounding. Well into the 20th century, researchers experimented on black people based on the assumption that the black body was more resistant to pain and to injury. Yeah, medicine has come so far, and yet has it? Okay, estrogen disruptors, BPA and DES. I'm sure some of you remember when BPA became a big thing, 2008. Finally, a bunch of US health officials said that BPA was likely a carcinogen. However, we knew in the 1930s, scientists knew that BPA could mimic estrogen. So there was a data transfer gap there. Some people knew, but not everybody knew. So in 2008, they created all this legislation that protected end users. So if you bought a plastic product, it would have like minimal levels or no BPA in it. But none of this legislation protects the people making the product. So they're exposed to thousands of times more BPA than the end user. And this happens all over manufacturing because oftentimes these workers that are getting all this exposure are women or people of color. And they're most of the workforce that work for, say, the auto industry, for the subcontractors that make the plastic parts inside cars. Every day they're exposed to thousands of times more toxins than people who buy the cars, the end user of the car. So in a similar vein, there was a drug called DES. It was a synthetic estrogen. I think it was some kind of, they thought it would calm people. I'm not sure what they were thinking, but it was used for 30 years by millions of women. But in 1971, they figured out that it causes a rare vaginal cancer, not to the women who took it, but to the women who were in utero while their mothers took it. They were dying of this crazy cancer. So 30 years they used it, and then they finally stopped after seeing all these rare, crazy cancers. So clearly we need to collect the data, analyze the data, and make sure that we are protecting people, because clearly we're doing a pretty poor job up until now. Clinical trials. So women make up 55% of HIV positive people in the developing world. They have different symptoms and complications from HIV. But in HIV research in the US, which is, one of the forefront places, 19% are women in retroviral studies, 38% in vaccination studies, and 11% in studies to find a cure. So vastly different numbers from the actual number of women that have the disease and the number of women who are getting treated or participating in trials. In early testing for some drugs, animal cells are used for testing treatment for women that are actually male cells. So they'll take a male rat cells and test a product that's for ovaries or breast cancer. It's kind of ridiculous, and the results really don't pay off. 2014 paper found that studies of female prevalent diseases, only 12% of the studies used female animal cells. 2007 analyst of animal studies revealed 54% showed sex-specific side effects. So half of the studies showed that these drugs work differently on male cells than female cells. And yet still, we continue to not use both male and female cells. At a cellular level, women and men are different. They react differently. A 2016 scientific study discovered a difference in how male and female cells react to estrogen. If you take a male cell and a female cell, you expose both of them to estrogen, then to a virus. The female cell responded to the estrogen and fought the virus. The male cell did nothing. So this leads me to the question, how many treatments have we not discovered for diseases because they didn't work for male cells, but they would have worked for female cells? We're missing out on treating half the population by focusing on only one group. There's another problem in legacy drugs. There's many drugs that have been around a long time that were tested before we had any diversity and inclusion in clinical trials. A good example is the drug Valium. Does anybody know what Valium is? So in America, sometimes we say it's mother's little helper. The implication is this is like the bored middle-class housewives drug of choice, basically. So it's, let's see, it is 2 million women take Valium every year. But Valium was never tested and has not been tested on women ever. The early trials, no women. Now, no women. So we are prescribing this drug to tons of people who it was never intended for or never tested for. And that goes on to say less than half of publicly available prescription drugs have been analyzed for differences in efficacy between men and women. Okay, so this is a chart or a graph showing global race distribution for clinical trials. You can see white people make up 76%, Asian 11%, Black or African people 7%, 5% other, 1% American, Indian, or Alaska Native. Just out of curiosity, can anybody guess on the globe the percentage of people that are white Europeans? Guess. 15? Pretty close. 16%. 16% of the world is European. Okay, what about Africans? Any guess? 14. It's 14. And Asians? Asians are 55% of the global population. And Latinos are 4%, and people of Middle Eastern and North African descent, 8.5%. So you can see there's a very gross disparity between how the participants in clinical trials and the actual global makeup, racial makeup of our planet. And we are trying to develop things for everyone, right? So, yes.
Thank you. Don't you have a data about like the percentage of a wealth in population? Because you are not developing the drug for the whole world. You're developing the drug for the customers who can buy it, especially in the US.
Yes.
So if you look at it, they're like 1% of American Indian and Alaska Natives. How many of them in the real world have the purchasing power to buy the drug? From my non-data point of view, the white portion of the populations, especially in the US, they are the wealthiest part of the population. They have the money to buy the drugs, to buy the insurance, to pay for the, for the medical procedures and stuff like that. So
that's a thorny one. I would say, well, first of all, nobody has the money to pay for drugs out of pocket in America. Like the drugs are so insanely expensive, you have to have insurance. And I would say that now the situation, if you're truly poor in America, you get free health care. If you're with the Affordable Care Act, more and more people you have a legal right to insurance. Whereas before the Affordable Care Act, they could say, oh, you're HIV positive or you have some other comorbidity, we're not covering you. Insurance companies aren't allowed to do that now. So I think that access is greater. So I would say there's not as much. In the 1980s, there was definitely a big economic factor. Now I would say the situation is much improved. It's still terrible, but it's much improved. It's not, I mean, someday maybe America will be like Europe, but for now, I would say that's not as much a factor as you would think on first blush.
Yeah, but my point of view is that this can be like a logical business like point of view on the things, because like on the previous slide you have like the data that 55% of the women in the developing world, they have HIV, and in the studies there are like very small percentage of it. But these studies are done in the US mainly for the US market.
No, not for HIV anymore. Like we're in people that are drug manufacturers in America that are making stuff for HIV. We've got HIV, I don't want to say sorted, but the situation isn't acute in America. When American pharma companies are making HIV drugs, it's largely for the developing world, not for Americans. Because there are several new drugs out that can either completely repress it or stop it from taking hold. So it's the acute phase, they're focusing more on Africa and places that have more HIV.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so at MSD, I encourage you to look at our beautiful MSD website. And we have a department called the Diversity and Inclusion in Clinical Trials Group. They are working really hard to actively recruit people of underrepresented groups. They're doing this by implementing diversity plans across all late-stage trials, which is good. They are selecting US sites based on diverse communities, which they use census data to find those diverse communities. They develop partnerships with community organizations, colleges and universities, and professional organizations to expand outreach to people from different genders, races, ethnicities, and sexual orientations. And they invest in training and tools for researchers, clinicians, and others at clinical trial sites to address the need for broader clinical trial access. It's working. You can check out this link and see for yourself, but approximately 50% of MSD's clinical trial patients were from diverse backgrounds, which I think both globally and in the USA, by the way. And that's wonderful, because one of the problems with clinical trials is that they rely on people having the leisure time and the ability to participate in something that could be potentially debilitating. So a young white male college student is like the demographic that goes for clinical trials, because they want the money, they have the time. And so if you really want to reach out to people, diverse people, busy people, you need to make sure that you're in their area and not just near a college town. Okay, this is a little bit of user experience, finally. So there were several philanthropic organizations that were attempting to make clean cooking stoves, because women who are cooking on, this is called a traditional 3-stone stove. And basically it's 3 stones with a cooking vessel on top. And they often use these indoors. A woman using one of these stoves in an unventilated space, it's the equivalent of smoking 100 cigarettes in a day. Indoor air pollution is the leading environmental risk factor for women and children over 5. So there is 3 times as many deaths worldwide from fume inhalation as from malaria. So a bunch of people tried to launch designs, and in the end, they weren't used. And the designers blamed the women, saying, oh, they're old-fashioned, they're being too traditional. Why don't they want to use my beautiful product? But no women were consulted before these products were designed, these new stoves were designed. And they took a lot more attention, took more care, took more maintenance, and they limited a woman's ability to multitask. And if you've ever had a baby or been around a baby, you know multitasking is essential, especially like in that newborn phase. Like, you have to do 4 things at once, otherwise you will get nothing done. So in the end, these designs prioritized efficiency over the needs and wants of the users. I have to say, after this happened, several other designers came up with ideas that actually involve the women in the development, and they're much better. Another area where we're falling short is US maternal mortality rate in Black women. I don't know if you know this, but it's terrible. This is another example of racism and sexism in medical services. Black women have worse health outcomes across the board than white women. The death rate of Black expectant mothers in America is equal to the death rate of mothers in Uzbekistan and Mexico, places with a lot lower GDP. Black women are 243% more likely to die from pregnancy and childbirth-related complications than white women. 243. And this is not economics or like a racial divide based on class. Black college-educated women in New York City are more likely to suffer complications from pregnancy and childbirth than white women with not a college or not a high school diploma. So clearly this needs to be looked into. The precise reasons are not known, but we need to pay attention to this issue because it's glaringly obvious. Okay, artificial intelligence, yay! So, AI, as we know, is only as good as the data that we feed it. AI for skin cancer right now still has not been trained on images labeled as black or dark skin, so therefore cannot detect any cancer on black or dark skin. So we need data that reflects our diverse population, and we need to stop letting our data be skewed toward white men so that these data sets don't represent the population at large. For instance, an AI system for chest x-rays for lung disease was only trained on male scans. So it doesn't work at all for women. Just, sorry, no chest scan for you. Another example, voice recognition software. So voice recognition software works by referencing something called a corpora, which is just a large sample of voices. In many of these databases, the ratio of men to women is 2 to 1. As a result, often these systems don't hear the female voice. They have problems recognizing anything because of how it's trained. This is ironic because women's voices are scientifically easier to understand because we use longer vowel sounds, we speak more slowly, and we slur less. This is important in the medical realm because voice recognition software has produced 15% critical errors in tests in emergency room transcriptions. So correcting these errors takes time that clinicians don't have and can result in injury or death. Finally, this is a quote from Meredith Broussard. She did an interview in The Guardian that is on AI that's very interesting. But racism, sexism, and ableism are systematic problems that are baked into our technological systems because they're baked into society. It would be great if the fix were more data, but more data won't fix the technological systems if the underlying problem is society. And finally, data sets. AI is only as good as the data it's trained from, like I said. If you look at the statistics, 27% of American CEOs are female, but 11% of Google image results when you search for CEO are female. It should at least reflect reality. It doesn't have to reflect my ideal reality, but a reality would be nice. So some solutions. Governing bodies should require the devices are tested on diverse populations before devices are released into the wild. We should organize supply chains so surgical teams get equipment that matches the team's makeup. We need to train physicians on explicit and implicit bias. We need diverse and inclusive imagery and language for both AI and humans. We need to collect data to monitor health equity, recruit people from different populations to design and test medical devices, and we need to actively train AI against stereotyping. In April 2022, the US Food and Drug Administration updated their guidance to improve diverse representation in clinical trials, including the requirement that device applications must report clinical trial demographic data, among other enhancements. So steps are being made. I hope that things will move faster. And a 2017 study on image interpretation decreased bias amplification by 47.5%. We need to do more of this. We need to make sure that we're always thinking about how to improve these technologies that are moving so fast. The solutions are out there. We just need the resources and the attention to solve these problems. Finally, if you'd like to learn more, I highly recommend Invisible Women by Caroline Criado Perez. The Guardian has tons of great articles about AI and racism and sexism. And I was very inspired by Mansi Gupta. She leads Unconformed Studio, which is a design studio that tries to envision all their projects from women first and then moving outward. So an inclusive by starting with women. So with that, I thank you so much. And now I'll put on my glasses so I can see.
Thank you very much, Summer. Right now it's time for a Q&A session. So I will switch computers because we already have plentiful of questions on Slido.
Wow.
Like, by plenty, I mean 6.
I will set mine aside. 6 is good.
And also, I would like to try a new thing. Let's cover these questions first. And after that, I would like to invite you to go here and create a discussion. I will move here like 2 or 3 chairs. So think about what you want to discuss about. And then I will ask you to sit here, take a microphone and do the discussion, opposed to just shoot the question to really go in depth.
Somebody else has to be up here in the hot seat. I like it.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. To be like more balanced. And before we jump into those questions, I would like to ask, use the fact that I have the microphone in my hand and ask you what other areas different from medical sector do you think suffer from racism and sexism as much as what you just covered?
All areas. Yeah. So in the book, there was one example of snow shoveling. I think that one's great, right? So they figured out that in Sweden, it was in Sweden, right? A disproportionate number of women were having these crazy accidents in the snow. And they figured out it was because they prioritized plowing the streets before the sidewalks. Yet everyone needs to get out of their house to get to the street. So women were getting injured and going to the hospital because they would prioritize plowing the streets. When they started to prioritize the sidewalks, like the GDP went, like everything was better. And it was just because they improved things for women. So there's a ripple effect to this. Like not being a racist and not being a sexist also improves everybody's lives too. So it's not just like, just do-gooderism. It's also better for everyone objectively.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And I also have like one question for the audience. just raise your hand again, and then we will go to the question here. Who of you had this idea of, oh my God, we are neglecting this group in our company, and this urge to invite someone like during the time you were listening to Summer? Please raise your hand. Who was inspired? Okay, 1, 2. Not so many. I'm curious.
You should
about
be more inspired.
Okay, thanks. In that case, let's jump into the questions. Love your talk. I have additional question. Are you aware of the issue of the high number of undiagnosed women in adulthood with neurodivergent disorders?
Deeply and personally, because I've self-diagnosed myself with ADHD. But yeah, what they're finding is that because of how women are socialized, they have found that way more women have autism and ADHD disorders than ever thought possible, because boys are allowed to act out in a way that girls are not. So women with autism spectrum disorders or ADHD type disorders are taught to repress and figure out coping mechanisms at very young ages, while boys are given drugs. So it's a phenomenon, and I think we're going to see that instead of it being a male disorder, they're going to say it's actually 50-50, like everybody's got it.
Thank you. From the author, do you have any supporting question or additional question? If not, that's fine. And I would also like to give you an opportunity to raise your hand, and I will run towards you with the microphone. Now? No? Okay, let's continue here. Okay, so are women included in MSD clinical trials?
Yes, yes, and yes.
Okay, do you want to expand on that?
I am not an expert on clinical trials, but you can look at the MSD website at the link I provided before. I think if you just go to msd.com and then search clinical trials, you'll get as much data as I had access to. But yeah, basically they're working really hard to make it 50-50 men and women, and to really make sure that minority groups are properly represented.
And may I ask you how all this knowledge you just sucked in and try to boil it into this presentation affect you on your everyday basis in MSD, if you are allowed to talk about it?
No, honestly, my everyday life at MSD, it's not affecting, but I'm not working on anything that's even closely related to this. But just personally, I have this friend who's Black, and he's got prostate cancer. And the rate of prostate cancer amongst the Black population is way higher. And we still don't understand why. We don't understand why the maternal mortality rate is so high. So this galls me from a personal level. I want to figure out why this is happening to people. It's not right.
Thank you. No question from the audience, okay. Don't be afraid. What about regulations in the medical industry? Do they cover this topic, or are there any initiatives to legalize it?
Legalize?
Making it mandatory.
Oh, yes. So like I mentioned, with the clinical trials, the FDA has issued new guidelines. But the problem is those are for federally funded trials. So what's great about MSD is that they're doing this voluntarily. They're saying, we know this is a problem and we want to address it because we care. Whereas I don't think all pharma companies are doing the same. I haven't researched them deeply, so I can't answer for sure, but I do think MSD is trying to be, they're altruistic in a way, and they're trying to be ahead of regulation, better than what the federal government is asking. So I do think even in the EU now, they're codifying it. The one country that's kind of behind right now is the UK. But I think they're going to be shamed into catching up with the rest of us.
I have a question about this because from my knowledge, I knew some manufacturers of the FFP mask during the COVID. Mm-hmm. And the main reason why there be only one size to fit all was the government, was the high strict regulations. What do you need to accomplish to receive FFP2 certifications? These processes took like very, very long because before the COVID, they have like one mask per month.
Yeah.
and during the COVID, they had like thousands of applicants. So the main reason why we didn't have a lot of sizes was the regulation from the government.
Yeah.
So how does the regulation can be effective in these like critical times when we need to make some process very, very fast? Because I understand that if we look and if we'll have 30 years to gather data, test some on some drugs, and then we will launch it, it can work.
Yeah.
But you don't have 30 years in many situations. You need to develop it very, very quickly. So how this can be like improved from your point of view?
I think by requiring fit tests on prototypes. So before they even apply, they have to show that it fits diverse face types, just from the go. I mean, those masks have been around forever. They just became an acute need during COVID. So if we say, look, you're making any kind of medical device, make sure it fits different faces or different body types or different people. That should be part of the application process, part of the government approval, in my opinion. From the start.
Okay, but during the COVID, just only like one point. Like, if this will be made in the law during the COVID, we'll have a lot of less masks because a lot of less, like the manufacturers would go through the process to be able to create the mask. So we'll have even bigger shortages of them. Because we will require not to have one size, but to develop 4 size, 4 manufacturing lines to create different sizes and stuff like that. So,
agreed. I hope that we never get caught off balance as bad as we did during COVID, because that was pretty incredible. But I think because of COVID, lots of manufacturers are thinking more holistically and thinking ahead, like they're all watching that Gwyneth Paltrow movie and thinking, better not eat the pork. But I joke. But I think that things that used to seem like a dystopian, far out idea are becoming, people are considering it better. So I hope that manufacturers and government regulators are saying, okay, this is a possibility. We may need full body like PP for everyone. So let's figure out how we can have that ready in case of the next disaster.
Okay,
anticipation.
This topic is personal for me because me and my friends are developing like a medical device, and we are going through this MDR certification, and I know that it's really hard to create different designs, because with different design it means a new certification, and it means a new extra bag of money and time, like being put somewhere. So in a sense, it's killing innovation. Like yeah, and it's really hard to find like the proper sport, the balance. So just comment from my side. Okay, so what do you think? It's always a sexism or racism, or are some of the stupidities just a result of a lack of proper design process? Isn't it another assumption?
I totally agree. Yeah, I think that often it's not like people are being exclusive. They're just not being thoughtful, and they're not thinking about all the end users, all the customers for their products. So yeah, I 100% agree.
Thank you. No hands? Yes.
I wanted to ask what other factors than gender or race do you find important to cover to eliminate bias? I mean, bias for me is the most fascinating phenomenon in data. So I take it like from the data perspective, yeah.
Yeah.
And which factors do you perceive are the strongest?
I think besides gender, besides sex and race, you also have ageism, where there are many products now. I think I'm aware of it, but I don't know how many designers really think about contrast ratios or about using animations that might trigger people, especially, you know, as people get older, they get dizzy. They can't focus on moving images so much. So yeah, I think that we need to consider when we're designing products that they fit older people as well. That's I think, a major concern because young people always adapt.
I don't think there is a checklist for all the factors. For example, ginger people are less sensitive to anesthesia or painkillers, so that's another thing. So it's also hair color, maybe also other things. So I think the approach should be actively seeking for these and not having a checklist like, gender done, age done, nationality done, but trying to actively seek for those.
Yeah.
Okay, moving forward. What's your opinion on medical research that was done decades ago? Was real racist and or sexist, but eventually led to advantages in surgery?
Obstetrics.
Yes, etc.
That's thorny. I mean, there are examples like, the Nazis doing terrible things, but coming up with new therapies. But then you have like the Tuskegee experiments where they just gave let black men live with untreated syphilis and watch them. It led to nothing except torture and pain for these people. So I don't think we should ever say like that medical advance came from evil people, so let's not use it. But I think that 90% of the time, those evil people just did terrible things that produced no tangible result that benefited anybody. So that's my opinion.
Do you know whether Apple does a better job with the health function of Apple Watch?
As I understand it, much like the oximeter and the infrared thermometer, it's still a problem measuring blood oxygen levels on people with darker skin. There's a class action lawsuit actually right now. I don't know where it is in the courts, but yeah, black people are like, this doesn't work for me. Thanks for making me spend $1,000 on this watch that doesn't really tell me what I need. So yeah, it'll be curious to see what Apple does with that because they have the resources to quickly fix this problem. So we'll see. As of now, I don't think they've improved.
Do you think there is someone who is leading the way towards more unbiased future in the medical sector right now? Either a company or like some institution or whatever?
I think everybody's improving, and I think that the European and American governments are legislating more inclusivity. So I think all brands and all companies are going to have to start thinking better. But I don't know enough to say who's doing the best. I would say Apple has the most money, so they can do the best, so they should. But I don't know of anybody that I could point out is better than anybody else.
I know the company named Wittings. It's a French company. Company named Wittings. They're a French company. They are making like smartwatches and stuff like that, and they are the only one certified by the FDA about the Oximeter or how does it named in the US. So yeah, they're basically like manufacturing of like smart scales and stuff like that, and they're creating like crazy things what you put in the toilet and analyze your urine for the stuff like that. It's crazy expensive and it looks cool in Las Vegas on some tech expo, but the smartwatches works. I have one of them, but I'm white, so I don't know, but it works on me better than any smartwatches what I have before.
Just another question. It's not only darker skin, but the sensors on the smartwatches have problems with tattoos, even on white people.
Yeah.
So would you think it would be fairer, because it's obviously a technical issue, to note, all right, this health kit is only for whites? Because
I think
otherwise we are cheating the customer, right?
No, I think that they should be made to figure out a better way to work. Not because, like you said, like if a tattoo or a tan can make a white person also this product malfunction on the white person, that's not good either. We need inclusive design so that it works on everybody full stop. And maybe it just means they use a different way of measuring. I don't know, but it should be a requirement that it works on everybody.
It's the rays, the light rays, and obviously the dark color absorbs more light.
Yep.
So
Well, I've even heard of people, black people, having trouble with the automatic, and even actually sometimes if I have a tan, I notice like in the airport, the automatic faucets don't work so well. And it's like, but yeah, I think it just should be basic requirement that it works for everyone.
well, and then should they then stop the feature before they figure it out? Would it
No,
be that
no,
strict?
I think it needs to be with a disclaimer
'Cause
now.
maybe it's just
and
like only a couple of years since we have Apple Watch, right? So maybe they are on the way to something.
yeah, but oximeters have been around since the 1970s. So, yeah, I'd say that it should be a disclaimer now, but they should be really actively working, and we should force them to improve their products to work for everyone.
Thanks a lot. This is the start of a discussion. I like it. Okay. Is there a study showing differences in medicament effects for different races?
I cannot answer this one. I don't know. I'm sure there are studies out there, but not any that I have read.
Does anyone know? No, unfortunately. It was worth a try. How would you apply solutions you mentioned in countries where the majority of habitants are against diversity, whether that can be gender, age, race, sexuality, etc.?
Okay, this is interesting because there can be places also where it's not that they're even actively against, but for instance, if you have a clinical trial in this country, you're going to struggle to find people of African or Asian descent because it's a majority white place. So I would say you balance those kind of situations, whether it's active bias or just the population's makeup, with making sure that you test things in various locations, you test your solutions globally instead of locally. That's how I think you fix it.
Do you think there's a room for such agency? Providing like worldwide services?
Ooh, I do.
Okay. What about other genders? And do you think that reaching perfectly representative samples in studies is ethically worth potentially delaying life-saving drugs?
I would say from what I've read, it requires more work in place. It doesn't seem to take longer. It just requires people that are designing clinical trials to be very thoughtful and look at census data, make sure, in America, Black Americans, because of things like the Tuskegee experiment, are distrustful of the medical system. So you really have to make sure that you partner with somebody in the community. And I don't think that takes that much longer. And I don't think that would delay drugs being available at all, actually. It just requires a little bit more thoughtfulness and a little bit more community outreach, in my opinion.
Thank you very much. This is your last chance to ask a question. Raise your hand. Oh, yes.
Thank you for such an amazing presentation, but I was just also curious if there are any case studies or maybe success stories that you could share more that illustrate the progress in combating the racism and sexism in medical device design.
I think you should read the book. No, honestly, Invisible Women has a lot of so much. I mean, the book is very data heavy. Actually, you can borrow my copy. But it's really data heavy, and she has tons of examples of ways of solutions that are really fixing these problems. And also online, I found, actually, I can share the links later, but I found quite a few studies on how to implement these solutions and how it's not that difficult. So I can share those. Maybe I will share them and you can share them with a wider group. But yeah, there are plenty of examples out there.
Please do. We can put it under the recording itself.
Super.
Okay.
It's all in my tabs.
I see no hands in the air. And watching my watch, it's quite late now. So let's skip the discussion part entirely. Or are there
Actually, though, I think Misha came. Maybe if You want to say something?
Hi, could you please introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Misha Schwarzova, and I'm a diversity, equity, inclusion person in MSD Czech Republic. I have a huge imposter syndrome at this very moment because I'm not a UX person, and obviously I'm not even like a medical professional. So I'm basically just here from the behalf of the company as the employer, and I really believe that this is super important to mention, because it's not just about the clinical trials as such to have the representation, but it's primarily even having the people in the company who are even like thinking in all of the processes along the way before you even have the idea, or you have even some research discovery until you actually market and sell the product. There is so much steps that can be overlooked just because the people are not represented in the process at all. And it's not like you are now forced to think from the lenses of every single person you can imagine, but it's basically just having very much diverse people and population in the working process as well. So that's pretty much what I have to add.
It's awesome.
Any comments and questions regarding to that? Okay, is there, okay, yeah. Here, Simon.
Thank you. So what is your suggestion for the Tobias startup when they are like only 3 to 4 people? Because I understand your point of view in the company such as MSD, when you have thousands, maybe 10,000s of employees, but when you have a small team of professionals and they are working on the new smartwatches, for example, how they can like include all of these different people to help them, because it's basically not possible. So, and my second question is, I know that this maybe will be problematic in the US, but is it possible to just create a product like you said and just said, okay, this is smartwatches only for white people, because we don't have resources to make the whole research. We don't want to guarantee something because we don't make a marketing bullshit talks on the website. Is it okay from your point of view to just like specific a target group and create something beneficial for them and not to try to create something for all of the people?
Yeah, to your first point, again, my suggestion would be consult. Like there is, you don't need to necessarily have the people in house, but there is plenty of ways when you're designing the product. And again, it goes more to your expertise than mine. There are definitely ways how to get the information or points or perspective of other target groups or interested groups as such. When it comes to designing exclusive product, let's say like that, as opposition to inclusive product. I mean, there is a question whether it's like even worth it giving all the troubles you are actually making yourself going into where marketing it, where having the public discussions and everything. I can imagine that, for example, with the wearables or Apple Watch or whatever, you can have like different series. You can have like a series for some palette of skin tones. You can have another series for another palette of, so you can have like special editions that fit the purpose. But I mean, you are basically limiting your market. That's the first thing, and you are actually pissing people off. So the question is it worth it? I don't know. Of course, it's everybody's decision, like business makers, to have. There are definitely some. You need to take in consideration the legislation as well. Right? You cannot be like explicitly exclusive or of some of the topics in some of the products, but again, the variety is huge. So in my point of view, it's like you're making it too easy for yourself. And I think from long term, when it comes to like development and new design, this is simple as step back.
Agree.
But the other point of view is class action lawsuit onto Apple. You know, like they are not telling that the Apple Watches aren't working on certain people on their marketing materials.
But this is a problem of not testing.
Yeah, because so they are basically, they are not limiting the focus groups. They don't care actually, because like you said, they have the research from the 70s and probably they have a lot of smart people. They know the information that these things aren't working on these types of people, and they basically don't care because it's easier for them to target the larger market audience and sell the product to like more people if they don't say specifically that it doesn't work. And this is my last question. We can go to pub.
Now, I would say, like I said before, I don't believe that this came from a place like we're deliberately excluding people with darker skin. I just think they didn't do it in the initial testing. So if you say you create a product, you need to test it on a diverse population, then they're going to find out in 1970 when they created the first product that, hey, this doesn't work on dark skin, but they didn't test back then. So I think if you make it a requirement from the early development phase, you will have a much different result. And maybe they would have found something that works even better if they had been challenged back then. I have two mics now. I'm all powerful.
Okay, in that case, I think it's time to officially end this this presentation. Thank you very much. And thank you, Summer.
You, Summer.
Yeah, for all the preparation. Okay, so thank you, Summer. Thank you all. My name is Tobias, and this was UX Monday. See you next month.